Hey gearheads! Today we're diving deep into the golden age of American muscle, but not the story you think you know. While everyone talks about the Mustang and Camaro, there's a hidden chapter of automotive history that's been gathering dust in the shadows. I'm talking about the forgotten giants of the muscle car era, the engines that changed everything then vanished into history. The 1960s and early 70s weren't just about freedom and rock and roll. They were about pure, unbridled horsepower. Detroit was locked in a high-stakes arms race, with each manufacturer pushing the boundaries of what was possible under the hood. This was a time when engineering teams worked around the clock, fueled by coffee and competition, trying to squeeze every last horsepower out of their designs. Picture this. It's 1964 and America's automotive landscape is about to change forever. The average family car had around 150 horsepower, but what was coming would more than triple that number. These weren't just engines. They were statements of American engineering prowess, built during a time when gasoline was cheap and emissions regulations were barely a thought. Let's start with the crown jewel of Chrysler engineering, the 426 Hemi. Sure, everyone knows the name, but few understand what made this engine so special. Nicknamed the Elephant for its massive size and power, the 426 Hemi was essentially a race engine made street legal. With its unique hemispherical combustion chambers and massive valves, this beast could generate over 425 horsepower, and that was just the conservative factory rating. Those hemispherical combustion chambers weren't just marketing hype. They allowed for larger valves, 2.25-inch intakes and 1.94-inch exhausts, positioned at opposed angles. This created optimal airflow patterns that would make any modern engineer jealous. The engine also featured solid lifters, a forged steel crankshaft, and heavy-duty connecting rods that could handle the immense forces being generated. But here's what most people don't know. Chrysler was actually losing money on every 426 Hemi they sold. Each engine required extensive hand assembly, with specially trained technicians spending hours ensuring everything was perfect. It's why you'll barely find 11,000 street Hemis ever made. Today, cars with these engines are worth small fortunes, with some reaching prices over $500,000 at auction. Now let's talk about the sleeping giant, Chevrolet's LS7 454. This wasn't just another big block Chevy. This was the pinnacle of GM's muscle car engineering. Designed in 1970, the LS7 was rated at 465 horsepower, making it one of the most powerful production engines of the era. Let me paint you a picture of what made the LS7 special. We're talking about an engine with aluminum heads featuring massive ports, a solid lifter camshaft with 0.459-inch intake and 0.481-inch exhaust lift, and an 11.25-to-1 compression ratio. The engine featured 4-bolt main bearings, forged aluminum pistons, and a forged steel crankshaft that could handle over 6,000 RPM. In testing, some LS7 engines were pushing well over 500 horsepower on the dyno numbers that would be impressive even by today's standards. The few that made it into the wild became the stuff of legend, powering some of the fastest street cars of the era. But if you want to talk about overlooked powerhouses, you can't ignore the Pontiac 455 Superduty. In 1973, when most manufacturers were already backing down from the horsepower wars, Pontiac went all in. The 455 SD was their last hurrah, a 310 horsepower monster that could still run with the best of them, even as emissions regulations were choking the life out of muscle cars. The 455 Superduty wasn't just about displacement. It featured a reinforced block with 4-bolt mains, special round port cylinder heads, an aluminum intake manifold, and a unique camshaft design that helped it meet emission standards while still delivering impressive performance. The forged pistons and special connecting rods were designed to handle sustained high RPM operation. These engines were so potent that magazine tests of the time consistently showed quarter-mile times in the low 13-second range. Remarkable performance for a street-legal car of that era, especially considering the primitive tire technology available. What made these engines disappear? It wasn't just one thing. Limited production numbers played a huge role. When you're hand-building engines, you can't make many of them. The 426 Hemi required special assembly lines. The LS7 never made it past the prototype stage, and the 455 SD was built in such small numbers that finding one today is like discovering buried treasure. Then there were the reliability issues. These engines were pushing the technology of their time to the absolute limit. The high compression ratios demanded premium fuel, which was becoming scarce. The aggressive cam profiles could lead to valve train problems if not properly maintained. Many couldn't handle daily driving without constant attention from skilled mechanics. But the final nail in the coffin was the changing times. The 1970s brought strict emissions regulations, with the Clean Air Act of 1970 demanding significant reductions in exhaust emissions. Insurance companies were charging astronomical rates for high-performance cars. Then came the 1973 oil crisis, when gas prices quadrupled almost overnight. Suddenly, these fire-breathing monsters weren't just expensive to build, they were becoming impossible to sell. Yet their legacy lives on. Every modern performance car, from the Hellcat to the ZL1, owes a debt to these pioneering engines. The lessons learned from pushing the boundaries of natural aspiration helped develop the sophisticated forced induction systems we see today. The metallurgy and manufacturing techniques developed for these engines paved the way for modern high-performance engine building. The technology that made these engines special, the hemispherical combustion chambers, the high-flow heads, the aggressive cam profiles, has evolved into the foundation of modern performance engineering. Today's engines might make more power, but they stand on the shoulders of these giants. Consider this. The 426 Hemi's basic design principles influenced Chrysler's modern Hellcat engine. The lessons learned from the LS7 454 helped develop GM's current LT series engines. And the round port head design pioneered by Pontiac, it's still considered one of the best ways to maximize airflow in a pushrod V8. So next time you hear someone talk about the golden age of muscle cars, remember, there's more to the story than just the famous names. These forgotten engines might have disappeared from the showrooms, but their influence can be felt in every high-performance engine built today. And here's something to think about. While these engines may be rare, they're not extinct. In garages across America, dedicated enthusiasts are keeping these mechanical masterpieces alive. They're preserving not just machines, but a piece of automotive history that changed the way we think about performance. Before you go, drop a comment below with your favorite overlooked muscle car engine. Are there any hidden gems I missed? Any family stories about these rare beasts? Let's keep these legends alive together. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to catch more hidden chapters of automotive history. Until next time, keep your engines running hot and your stories alive.